The Russo-Ukrainian war has entered its 379th day, Thursday, the 3rd of September 2023. Quoting The Guardian, here are a number of events that occurred. The city of Bakhmut, located in eastern Ukraine, could fall in the next few days, said the Secretary General of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg. What we are seeing is that Russia is deploying more troops, more forces, and what is lacking is the quality of Russia, which they are trying to improve in quantity. They have suffered heavy losses, but at the same time, we cannot rule out that Bakhmut will eventually fall in the coming days. Wagner mercenary group founder Yevgeny Prigozhin, who led the Russian assault on Bakhmut, said Russian forces now fully control the eastern part of the city. The General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces said in its report on Wednesday, the 3rd of August 2023, morning, the enemy, despite significant losses, continues to storm the city of Bakhmut. Russia is unlikely to seize significantly more territory this year, according to U.S. Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines. Haines said at a Senate hearing that the Russian military probably would not be able to continue fighting at this time, even with Bakhmut's possible capture. The Pentagon is accused of blocking U.S. intelligence sharing with the International Criminal Court, ICC, on Russian war crimes in Ukraine. The Defense Department is said to be firmly opposed to using the Hague-based ICC as a way of holding Russian troops accountable for widespread war crimes on the grounds that precedent could eventually be turned against U.S. troops. President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky has invited the chairman of the U.S. House of Representatives Kevin McCarthy to visit Ukraine. Zelensky proposed the visit in an interview with CNN. Zelensky also called for democratic success in Georgia, where thousands of protesters gathered for a second day against the controversial foreign agent bill, which was used to silence critics. There is no Ukrainian who doesn't want our friendly Georgia to succeed. Success of democracy. Success of Europe. The U.S. has obtained warrants to seize Boeing planes belonging to Russian oil company Rosneft valued at more than $25 million, the Justice Department says. The District Court for the Eastern District of New York upheld the seizure, based on export control violations and sanctions against Russia, the Justice Department said. During a visit to the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres told reporters it was important that the agreement allowing safe passage for ships carrying grain out of Ukraine across the Black Sea be renewed. Ukraine has traditionally been one of the world's largest grain exporters. The Pentagon is accused of blocking U.S. intelligence sharing with the International Criminal Court, ICC, on Russia's war crimes in Ukraine. The Defense Department is said to be firmly opposed to using the Hague-based ICC as a way of holding Russian troops accountable for widespread war crimes on the grounds that precedent could eventually be turned against U.S. troops. President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky has invited the chairman of the U.S. House of Representatives Kevin McCarthy to visit Ukraine. Zelensky proposed the visit in an interview with CNN. Zelensky also called for democratic success in Georgia, where thousands of protesters gathered for a second day against the controversial foreign agent bill, which was used to silence critics. There is no Ukrainian who doesn't want our friendly Georgia to succeed. Success of democracy. Success of Europe. The U.S. has obtained warrants to seize Boeing planes belonging to Russian oil company Rosneft valued at more than $25 million, the Justice Department says. The District Court for the Eastern District of New York upheld the seizure, based on export control violations and sanctions against Russia, the Justice Department said. During a visit to the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres told reporters it was important that the agreement allowing safe passage for ships carrying grain out of Ukraine across the Black Sea be renewed. Ukraine has traditionally been one of the world's largest grain exporters. A senior UN trade official will meet Russian representatives to discuss extending the deal. The European Union's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, said on Wednesday he had suggested the alliance spend €1 billion to procure joint ammunition for Ukraine and to replenish their own stockpile. I propose to mobilize another €1 billion, Reuters reported. Borrell told the media after a meeting of European Union defense ministers in Stockholm. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said it was still uncertain who carried out the attack on the Nord Stream gas pipeline in September last year, and a national investigation needed to be completed. German officials announced they searched a ship in January that they believed was heavily used to transport explosives used in sabotage. Germany has a leading role in the investigation. Intelligence reports reviewed by U.S. officials suspect pro-Ukrainian groups carried out the attack on the Nord Stream pipeline in 2022, New York Times reported. There was no evidence President Volodymyr Zelensky or his top lieutenants were involved, or that the perpetrator acted at the direction of any Ukrainian government official, the report said, citing U.S. officials. War protests in Ukraine. Russian children become targets of Kremlin crackdown. A 12-year-old boy in Russia has been punished for showing pictures opposing the war in Ukraine. It is the latest sign of the Kremlin's crackdown on Russia's youth. The girl, Masha Moskalova, was asked to draw a picture for an art class last April to show her support for Russia's special operations in Ukraine. Quoted from Al Jazeera, Masha apparently drew a picture of a mother and a child standing in the missile path with the words, "No to war," and "Glory to Ukraine." Masha's father, Alexei Moskalyev, who raised her alone in the town of Yefremov, in the Tula region, about 125 miles from the capital Moscow, was called to school the next day. Later, the two were taken away in a police car. Alexei is questioned by local officers who discovered disparaging comments he has made online about the Russian military. In court, Alexei was fined 32,000 rubles, $420, for discrediting the armed forces. The next day, Russian Federal Security Service, FSB, agents visited Masha's school, accused Alexei of bad parenting and said Masha should be taken away. After that, Masha admitted that she was afraid to attend classes. Alexei was eventually arrested, while Masha was taken away and treated by the authorities. It is a sign of how far Russian authorities have suppressed criticism of the war in Ukraine. On December 30, 2022, 5 police cars and a fire truck were parked outside their home. Alexei told Russian human rights group OVD Info he didn't want to let them in without a warrant, but he finally opened the door when they started breaking in. The police and the FSB searched the apartment where they lived, allegedly taking the family's savings, mobile phones, laptops, and anti-war pictures of Masha. Moscow authorities and the investigative committee for the Tula region have not yet responded to requests for comment from Al Jazeera on this matter. Alexei claims his head hit the wall and he was locked in a room with the Russian national anthem playing loudly. He was later charged again with discrediting the army, so Alexei now faces 3 years in prison. Last week, Alexei was detained for 2 days in a pre-trial detention center while Masha, who is currently 13 years old, was taken to a children's shelter. According to his lawyer Vladimir Bilyenko, Alexei has been released and is under house arrest. Alexei is under house arrest. He is only allowed to contact me and the investigators, Bilyenko said. Masha is in the shelter. We are working on getting him back and house arrest lifted. We have filed a complaint with the Attorney General and the Commissioner for Human Rights in the Russian Federation. If the father receives a prison term, his daughter will be sent to an orphanage, he added. Bilyenko did not comment on Alexei's alleged mistreatment while in custody. The head of Yefremov's City Commission for Juvenile Affairs, Svetlana Davidova, told Russian state media RBC the Moskalyevs had been added to a list of families in a socially dangerous situation. Masha is currently trapped in a children's center, and according to local media, she will not be released. It is common for entire families to be dragged into the persecution, even if only one member is guilty in the eyes of the regime, especially if that someone is a minor, said OVD Info English managing editor Dan Storyev. Not only Masha, a 10-year-old Moscow schoolgirl was detained when a classmate's parents reported her using Saint Javelin as a profile photo in a class group chat. Saint Javelin is a meme that became a symbol of Ukrainian resistance during wartime, featuring a religious icon in a yellow and blue robe holding a large gun. It later emerged that the girl and her mother were interrogated and their home searched, but ultimately no charges were filed. In another case in eastern Siberia, The 16-year-old anti-war protester Natalia Filanova was sent to a remote orphanage 186 miles from her home, while she was detained for participating in a rally and allegedly assaulting 2 police officers with a pen. Today we are seeing an alarming trend of minors being persecuted by the regime, along with their families, Storyev continued. The aim of the regime is to instill fear, so that they threaten families with separation, claiming that parents are not raising children properly, as happened with Alexei Moskalev, he said. Storyev provides another example where a child under the age of 18 clashed with the authorities after giving an anti-war opinion. Not only that, 2 high school students were harassed by the public for refusing to stand up during the Russian national anthem and instead played the Ukrainian national anthem instead. In the city of Yekaterinburg, a child is publicly scolded for writing a letter to a soldier, urging him not to kill people in Ukraine and asking him to come home soon. Meanwhile, a 16-year-old was fined for saying if he entered the army he would fight for Ukraine, said Storyev. According to our data, at least 544 minors were detained in anti-war protests in the past year, and 7 minors are currently being criminally charged because of their anti-war positions, he said. In particular, minors were targeted for sharing posts or comments about anti-war demonstrations, distributing leaflets against mobilization and war, holding solo demonstrations, expressing anti-war views during school events, demonstrating anti-war clothing, and making anti-war inscriptions. Continues Storyev. Storyev also mentioned cases where young teenagers were arrested for direct